Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. I see already some comments, but before we kick things off, I would like to make sure that you can hear me, see me, and that everything with our audio video is fine. So please let me know on the chat whether you can hear me and see me. Okay, thank you, Carol, for your message. It took quite a while, so also keep in mind that then during the meetup, if you will be asking your questions and so on, it takes a while for us to see what you already have wrote. So again, welcome everyone to the final meetup of this year's Angular Love Spring Camp series. I am Mateusz Stefańczyk, and I will be your host today on behalf of the entire Angular Love team, the people behind these meetups. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Our Spring Camp includes 3 meetups with 3 talks usually from the top Angular experts. We have already had 2 great sessions, and this one is the final one. As always, we are streaming live from Warsaw, Poland, so feel free to say hi in the chat and let us know from which city, which country you are joining us. Before we dive in, big thanks to our sponsor, House of Angular. They live and breathe Angular. So if you're working on a project, you need some help from the expert, you know who to reach out to. There is one more thing. We got a little surprise for you today. You have a chance to win a free ticket for NGDE. This is one of the biggest Angular conference in Europe, which will take part in Berlin from November 5 to 7. To enter, you just fill out the quick survey to the link which link you will find on the chat. It only takes a minute. After the meetup, we'll randomly pick one person and contact the winner by email. So don't miss this chance, don't miss this opportunity, fill out the survey, and maybe we'll see you in Berlin. Now, let's take a look at our today's agenda. We have lined up 3 amazing talks for you. First, Alain Chautard will dive into Let's Explore server-side rendering. Then Damian Maduzia will kick things off with case study, building an accessible product variant selector. And finally, Dmytro Mezensky will share the role of renderer 2 in modern Angular. As always, following each talk, we'll have the Q&A session. So don't hesitate to jump into chat, ask the question, chat, discuss with the community. By the end of the session, by the end of each talk, we will try to go over all of the questions. Okay, so without the further delay, I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Alain Chautard. Alain is a Google developer expert in Angular, a world traveler and photographer. Alain is also international conference speaker, a published author of several video courses, and the owner of Angular training website, where he shares his knowledge about the Angular. Welcome on stage, Alain.
Hello, thanks everyone.
How are you doing? How are you doing?
Doing great, thank you. How are you?
I am fine too. For you, it's probably the morning, right?
So I'm based in Sacramento, California, so pretty much on the other side of the world compared to most of the attendance today.
Yeah, that's right.
It's early morning for me, so.
Okay, so Alain, before we go to your presentation, I would like to ask you one question. Recently, we had the release of Angular 20. What are your thoughts about this version? What you like most about this version?
Yeah, so Angular 20 is obviously a big number, right? It's a second tenth of Angular releases, so it's a big milestone. What's really one of the most important things, even though it's still just developer preview, is the fact that zoneless is getting pushed more and more to the forefront of Angular, and it's something we've been preparing for quite a lot of time. I know that in my content, I've been preparing people about signals and component architecture and making sure that you get everything ready as much as possible for zoneless. So that's really one of the main topics that is very important, and that's going to change a lot of things about Angular in the next few months and with the next releases. So yeah, that's one of the big things to be aware of. There's a lot of cool other things with Angular 20, like the new DevTools track in Chrome for debugging. That's pretty good. But yeah, anything signals related, basically, I'm excited about. So that would be the main one for me. Yeah.
Yeah, there I would also say, like, also, as you mentioned, a lot of developer experience, but also some crucial stabilization there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so without taking more time, the stage is yours, and we will see back on the Q&A session. Good luck.
Perfect. So I'll start sharing my screen here. There you go. So you should be able to see my screen. Yep, perfect. And so yeah, today I'm going to talk about server-side rendering with Angular. And so we're going to see, where it comes from, what are the different features we have available now, kind of how it's working. And of course, if you have questions, we'll do a Q&A at the end to cover all of these topics. So my name is Alain, or just Al, and I'm a Google developer expert in Angular and Google Maps. Started with Angular back in the AngularJS days, a long time ago in 2011. And I've been doing consulting and training around Angular for so many years now. And my main website and activity is angulartraining.com, where I teach Angular to beginners or advanced groups of people, sometimes in person, sometimes online. Also through my blog and newsletter and some video courses that are available out there. And I speak at conferences pretty often. I've been speaking on all continents except Antarctica. So yeah, I've been all over the place to talk about Angular and web development. So that's me. Now we're going to talk about SSR, or server-side rendering. And so for the purpose of this talk, we're going to use a real app, which I often use for my training, which is store.angulartraining.com. It's a fake license plate store where you have products and you can add them to a cart. And it's an Angular application, of course. And that's what's going to be the base of our testing and the application we're going to use for this. So why server-side rendering first? Right, it's important to consider, is this something I should be using or not, and what are the benefits of doing it? So before getting into server-side rendering, it's important to remember that Angular by default is client-side rendering, right? And so when we use regular Angular without SSR, the process that's going on is really like this. You load an app in a browser by typing a URL. That URL is gonna send a request to a server, download the HTML app shell, which is our index HTML, which is pretty much empty, but refers to some JavaScript and CSS, which then gets downloaded. Then all of that code gets parsed by the browser and interpreted, which basically launches the Angular framework, which is then going to build the HTML DOM structure from our JavaScript code, build the UI piece by piece, render that on the screen, run our HTTP requests, like AJAX requests, right, to get data from a server, and update the DOM once more accordingly. And then at that point, the page is fully rendered. So all of these steps happen pretty quickly, usually, right? We don't necessarily realize that all of these little steps have to happen before we get our app fully loaded, but that's really what's going on. And so even if us human beings tend to not notice all of these steps, if you are, a SEO web crawler from Google or anything like this, you'll see that well, the first thing these crawlers will notice is that when they access the index HTML, it's empty. So they have nothing to index by default. And they're going to need to try to render that page later on to see what the actual content is. So there's definitely a delay in indexing, a delay in parsing the page. And so if one of your priorities is SEO and being indexed properly, that could be something that slows you down and makes things not as optimized as they could be. So that's what our index HTML looks like, right? In a regular Angular application, the only true HTML that we have is the root component, the app root. And then we have these reference to the scripts that we're going to download, runtime, polyfills, main.js, and of course the CSS. And that's it, right? That's what the browser would see by default before the application gets loaded. So in order to evaluate a web application, it's always a good idea to first take a look at what's going on. Are we doing good, or can we improve things? And one of the best tools we have out there to do that is Lighthouse. So Lighthouse is available in the browser. So I'm going to go to store.angulartraining.com. This opens the website. From there, I'm going to open the DevTools. In the DevTools, I would go to the Lighthouse tab. And in that Lighthouse tab, I can ask for a report to run an analysis of my website and get feedback from it. So I'm going to select desktop here. I'm going to ask for performance feedback, maybe best practices and SEO. So I'll include these 3 categories, and I click Analyze Page Load. So this is going to run a quick audit of my website, my Angular application. So what's going on right now is that Lighthouse is trying to load the app, simulating different network conditions, simulating what happens if JavaScript is not available, trying different screen sizes and all of that. So it takes about 30 seconds to get that report, and it's testing all sorts of things. So we see that it's loading the app, and it's going to do it quite a few more times. And from that, we're going to get a score and some feedback. So there we go. That's my score. So overall, I get 82 in terms of performance, 78 best practices, 73 SEO, right? And if I scroll down a little bit, I can get more details about why I got 82 in performance. And these scores are divided into multiple different categories: CLS, SI, FCP, LCP, TBT. If you're not familiar with those, you can scroll down further, and it's going to tell you that FCP is first contentful paint. And first contentful paint means this is the amount of time it took to display the page with the first, meaningful content visible on the page. So the user can see something that makes sense and start using the website, basically. A largest contentful paint is when basically everything gets loaded, right? The entire page is ready. I have a TBT blocking time of 280 milliseconds. That's because the page cannot be displayed before we download all of these scripts and CSS, so it's blocking before we get that. And we have a layout shift because the layout is changing as the application gets loaded. And we can see that down here in that view, where initially my page is blank. Then we have a component that gets loaded. Then we get more data and more components get loaded. And these components load their images. So the layout keeps changing on the page as we load more and more data and information. So I get a not super good score here on the layout shift because there's layout shifting on that page. And so this is usually a penalty from an SEO perspective, especially for mobile devices, because when you're on a phone, recomputing the layout and moving things around is a lot more expensive than on a laptop, for instance, because of course the screen is smaller, so there's more layout computations to be made, and on top of that, you're using more CPU, which means you're using more battery, and it's gonna impact the performance of that device. So layout shifts is something that SEO, search engines don't like too much, because it's impact the user experience on these smaller devices in terms of battery consumption, in terms of loading time, and in terms of all of these different things. So that's kind of what we can get from Lighthouse, right? We get all of these sorts of informations. You can get more details if you scroll down, and it can tell you all of the things you could improve one by one. So reduce the JavaScript execution time, avoid the layout shift, and all of that. So we get a to-do list of what to do, and we can even expand it. It's going to show us exactly which blocks are a problem and are shifting or whatever. So this is really good. Even without SSR, you can take a look at this and get a good to-do list of things to improve in your application. Now, this talk is about SSR. So why does SSR help with this? And that's our next step. We just saw that without SSR, we have layout shift, right? It's pretty much impossible to avoid, because initially there's nothing to display. The index HTML is empty, so we have this blank page that would show up and then start loading things little by little. When we use SSR, the main difference, if we take that process that we saw earlier of downloading the HTML and then the JavaScript and parsing it and everything, if we use server-side rendering, the main difference is that the page is fully rendered right from the start. As soon as we download the HTML and CSS, we have everything. We have everything, and the page is fully rendered right there. So as you can tell, there's not going to be layout shifting, because we already have the page with the right layout and everything on it. Which means there's no blank page. All of these numbers are automatically going to improve. They have to, because we get everything from the start. And then, of course, it's still going to happen that we download the JavaScript, because it's still an Angular application. So that JavaScript still gets downloaded, still gets parsed and interpreted. And then Angular is going to take over the DOM and control future updates. So that's the process known as hydration that you've probably seen here and there in Angular. So hydration is really a fancy word for saying Angular takes that DOM and just reuses it for future updates of our components. So it's just going to take over in terms of change detection, in terms of handling events and clicks and everything. And then the Angular app then becomes just a regular client-side Angular app. So hydration is what makes that possible. So as you can tell just from that, process, it seems that server-side rendering is going to solve a lot of things and improve our performance and SEO metrics. So server-side rendering is going to help with speed, of course, because if you render an index HTML on the server, it can be cached on the server side, on the client side. And, for some websites, if you have a landing page that's pretty much always the same and doesn't really change a lot, why rebuild it all the time if it's always the same, right? You could use cache and make things faster. SEO, pre-rendered pages load faster, score more points SEO-wise. That's pretty much impossible to beat at this point, since we get no more layout shifting and all of that. So all of the performance metrics improve, which helps with SEO, which helps with user experience. Yeah, it's really helping with so many things at this point that if you have, especially if you have something that's very slow, that would boost it quite a bit with very little effort. Which is our next topic, right? How can we enable SSR? How do we use server-side rendering? So the first thing I would recommend is to be at least on Angular version 17, because since Angular version 17, it's a lot easier to do SSR. The only thing, so if you start a new project that's on Angular 17 or more, you can just do ng-new --SSR. And as a matter of fact, even if you don't do that and you create a project with ng-new now, Angular is going to ask you, do you want to do server-side rendering? So you're going to get that question no matter what. And you can say yes or no. If you have an existing project and it's at least on Angular 17 and you want to add server-side rendering, all you have to do is ng-add at Angular/SSR. You run that command, and then you have an Angular server-side rendered project. Now, I know that sounds too easy, so I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to run the command just to prove you that it's possible. So my project is right here. So that's my license plate store project as we saw it in the browser. At this point, it's just a regular Angular application. If I open package.json, it's on Angular 20. There's no SSR stuff at all. It's just a basic, Angular project. So from there, I'm going to open a terminal, and I'm going to do ng-add at Angular/SSR. So running that command, and it's going to do a couple of things, such as creating a main server.ts, app config server.ts, app route server.ts, updating my Angular JSON, TS config JSON, package JSON, and the application config. So all of these things got updated for me or created, and we see that they're showing up right there. So that's really all there is to it. This code is standard. You don't have to change it. It comes with your setup of server-side rendering. By default, this routes.server.ts is saying that all routes are pre-rendered on the server side. That's an option we could change if we wanted to, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And in the app config, what was changed is provide client hydration with event replay. I'll also talk about that a little bit later. But that's the only change that was made here in the app config. And then we get all of these new files that got added and that do the work. Now, the funny thing is, I did that upgrade yesterday to Angular 20 to showcase this example. And when I ran ng-serve, I had the surprise that it was not working anymore. There was a little issue that happened. So I reported it to the Angular team, and they already fixed it, believe it or not. I opened an issue on the Angular repo, and it was fixed right away. And so now with the next, probably the next bug fix version, which would be Angular 20.03 or 4 already. What do we have here? Yeah, I have 3. So it would be with 20.04 most likely. That fix is going to be there. For now, I have to do it manually. So I think it is in the TS app config. That one file is missing here. And it is the main.server.ts. So I learned that from the bug I reported yesterday, basically, that this import was missing. But the Angular team jumped on it very quickly. And so now if I do ng-serve again, it should work. Hopefully. Yep, it works. And so now this app is rendered on localhost 4200. I'm going to open it. And so that's my license plate store running locally with server-side rendering. First thing you probably noticed is that everything got displayed instantly, right? It just loaded right away with everything displayed. And that's because we have server-side rendering. So we can check that We can check that from the network tab. If I go to the network tab and refresh my page, I go to the localhost, and in localhost, what I'm going to see is that what we get from the server is not just the app root anymore, but it's the entire HTML, right? So the very first request we make to load localhost doesn't just respond with the app root, it has everything in it. So this means this was server-side rendered by the server. So that's one way to see it. And of course, if we want to see how much of an impact this has, we can go to Lighthouse, and I'm just going to do a quick run again, same things as before. And I'm going to do that run, and you'll see that all of these numbers are going to improve. Now, I'm also cheating a little bit because this is running on localhost. The previous one was the version on the web. So yeah, numbers are going to be better. And yeah, performance is up to 91 now. So that's pretty good. We got a big boost in performance just by using server-side rendering. And as we could expect, the layout shift is almost non-existent. And the first contentful paint is very good too. So we had a little bit of blank, the time to just download the HTML, but then everything was displayed. And so there was no more layout shifting at that point. So we get to a stable page a lot faster as a result, which is what we wanted, which is really the point of server-side rendering. So we saw that SSR works, improves our experience, improves our performance. And in terms of changes made to our project, there's a few of them. So hydration gets enabled automatically, which means Angular downloaded everything. The entire DOM was downloaded to the page, as we saw. And then Angular would take over that DOM and run just as a regular client-side application without rebuilding it. And that's something that was done very recently, right? If you did server-side rendering with Angular Universal, before Angular 17, it would be a destructive hydration, meaning that Angular would just take over by destroying everything and rebuilding the app in the browser, which was not ideal. That's not the case anymore. Now Angular is just reusing that DOM and hooking into it to listen to events and make things happen. And not only that, there's something that's even better that's actually happening, is that when I go to my network tab again, and I look at my localhost web page, we saw that we download all of the HTML in here. But if we scroll to the very bottom of the page, you'll see that there's some ng-state downloaded, which is JSON. And that JSON is actually a cache of all of the HTTP requests that were made to pre-render the application, which means when Angular takes over my app in the browser, if there's an HTTP client request that we make, instead of doing that request and going to the server, it's going to use that cached data out of the box. So not only are we caching the HTML of that initial render, we're also caching the data of all of the HTTP client requests that we make. And it's part of my HTML here, right? There was a script tag at the very end with all of that info. So that makes things a lot faster as well. And that avoids Angular from making those requests twice, once on the server side and then once on the client side just instantly later. So that's a nice benefit that we get as well, that all of the data as JSON is cached within our HTML on the initial render. Since I'm talking about what's happening in the browser when we render an SSR app, we saw in the app config that there is this with event replay. right? And with event replay is something that was added, I think it was initially Angular 18 and then maybe stabilized in 19 or something like that, pretty recent. And what event replay is that, we download this entire HTML upfront, which means potentially a user could click on a button or start interacting with the page before the JavaScript is downloaded and before Angular took over the application, right? That could happen, especially if we have a lot of JavaScript to download and the network connection is pretty slow. That could happen, that we render that static HTML and then the user starts clicking around, and these events, they would be lost if we don't do anything. So what we get now by default, again, with Angular SSR, is this notion of event replay, which means that our HTML, even though it's just static HTML here, it's actually going to have a little bit of JavaScript to listen to all events. And that way, as soon as Angular gets loaded, these events are going to be replayed by Angular to make sure that we're not missing anything. So if I clicked on that Add to Cart button before the JavaScript of Angular was loaded and Angular was up and running, it would still work, because as soon as Angular is ready, that event will be replayed by Angular and do the right thing in the context of the Angular application. So that really makes our life easier, because we don't have to worry about anything really at this point. We just use server-side rendering, and then Angular takes care of pre-rendering that page on the server side. And if all of the synchronization stuff happens on the client side, whether it's events or data, Angular is just taking care of it. So that's pretty nice. What else can I say here? So yeah, the layout shift improves. So depending on the application and the network conditions, you'll see different performance results. When I created those slides a while ago, I had 88 of performance initially before SSR, and I was able to get up to 100 in terms of performance after using SSR, because again, no layout shifting, you get everything loaded up front, so performance automatically improves. So there are some things to be aware of, right? What I described so far seems like Angular is doing a lot of magic behind the scenes to make SSR a reality. But the thing is, if you want to do true SSR, you are going to need a Node.js server to run all of that. That wasn't the case before in regular Angular, right? You would just build your app, and once it is built, you just deploy your dist folder, and it just works in the browser. Now, that's a little bit different. If you do SSR, you need to run a Node.js server with your server-side code. So when we build an Angular SSR app, we end up with two folders in our dist. One is server, and one is browser. So I'm going to do a quick build here, just so you can see that. I'm going to stop my compiler, run ng build. Ng build completed. I can go to dist. In my dist folder, you see there's a browser folder, there's a server folder. So server has the server JS code with some chunks and an index HTML for the server. So that's basically the server-side stuff. And on the browser side of things, we get pretty much our regular Angular app, with the exception that the index HTML was also pre-rendered. So that page is also pre-rendered at build time with everything in it. And all of the routes of my application, which may or may not be something that you expected, were also pre-rendered when we use SSR. So I have a cart page. It was pre-rendered as well at build time. And the checkout page was also pre-rendered by ng-build. So that's what we call static site generation, or SSG. And yeah, it is also done automatically by the build process. And also caching the data, as you can see with the ng-state script at the end. So the JSON from HTTP requests get in the cache, if we have any, of course. So yeah, everything is pre-rendered at build time, and then we would need a Node.js server to run everything at runtime. So are there any things we have to do differently with SSR? And I saw a few questions, I think, in the chat. Hey, how do we know which APIs are available or not with SSR? Actually, pretty much everything would be available with SSR. The only things that are going to be a little bit different is that if you do browser-specific stuff, like using the window object or document, navigator, location, or some specific properties of HTML element, as you can imagine, these do not exist on the server side when Angular is pre-rendering those pages, right? It's pre-rendering the pages with Node.js, not with a browser. So if you pre-render with a Node, you don't have a window, you don't have a document, you don't have a location, or none of these things. So if you use these, you have to change your code a little bit. And the solution is to use some hooks that were introduced in Angular 16 after render and after next render. One of them was renamed in Angular 20, by the way, and I didn't update my slide yet, so sorry about that. But yeah, that's the idea. You would, any document manipulation or navigator or whatever native JavaScript API that you need, you would put them in these hooks after render or after next render to get that information. And that way, server-side rendering is just going to ignore those specific hooks and not run them, so that it only happens on the client side. That's really the idea. So that's one thing to be aware of, one small difference to know about. And the other important thing, and that's going to be my last topic, because I think I'm about to run out of time, static site generation versus server-side rendering, so SSG versus SSR. So if you don't want to use Node, or you don't have access to a Node server, or your company cannot do that, cannot use that kind of hosting or anything, you can still do a little bit of server-side stuff by using SSG or static site generation. Because as we just saw, when we run ng-build, we have a pre-rendered output for all of the pages, right? And so we could still use that as our production Angular code, which means initially we would have those pages pre-rendered and more and faster as a result. And then we just don't have SSR taking over and rendering everything on the server. So the main difference is that those pages would be built just once for all at compile time and not at runtime. That's the only downside of that SSG. So something you could use if your website or web app is very static and you don't have a lot of pages to take care of, just a couple of, or everything is static and doesn't change, that would be a very good option. And yeah, it gives you some benefits of SSR, but without having to change your infrastructure to host Node.js application. So in that case, you just do ng-build, and then you serve those static files, just like a regular client-side Angular app. So pretty straightforward. And yeah, in terms of pre-rendering, you can specify which routes you want to pre-render or not. And that's something we saw in that app route server. So here, everything is set to pre-render, but there are other options. So if I wanted some routes to be rendered on the client only, or on the server only, or pre-render and then take over, you have these options here that you can decide. So you can decide, oh, this path, so here everything is pre-rendered, but I could decide to make exceptions for some pages that are very dynamic and don't need to be pre-rendered because the pre-rendering would not mean anything. Or on the other hand, we can say, oh, these ones are super static. We can pre-render them on the server side. So you can fine-tune that config route by route in this app routes server.ts. And so, yeah, that's everything I can say about SSR in just 30 minutes. Just one last thing, which is the Angular certification program. That's something that I run with certificates.dev. So if you're an Angular developer and want to showcase your skills, feel free to check out certificates.dev/Angular, and you'll see all of these different certifications offered to you. They are maintained by GDEs. They are very serious. We take things very seriously. We do proctoring and code challenges. It's not just a quiz. It's actually pretty difficult. And so it has a lot of value on the job market these days. And a lot of companies are using those in Europe, in Asia, and in the United States. I added some links to my blog, my slides, my free Angular newsletter. And now I think we can cover some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Alain, for your awesome presentation. There is already like a lot of questions regarding the SSR. You have been talking about your courses, and I saw just one question was regarding the courses about the SSR. So does your courses cover it?
So in terms of training, right?
Yes, right. The training.
So that's something I cover. So not only in my online stuff, I do have a course on LinkedIn Learning, which is about Angular performance. And that course does have a few videos on SSR. So that's on LinkedIn Learning, and there's some good content on SSR that allows you to dive a little bit deeper. So that would be the place to go to, yeah.
Okay. There is another question from Arthur. Is it possible, reasonable to make SSR PWA if I would like to support offline mode and mobile-like desktop app experience?
Yes, that's something you could definitely do, and seems like a good use case. I would even say that, you know, if you do SSG, since everything is already static and pre-rendered, you pretty much you don't even need the PWA side of things anymore, or not as much. Only to accept the further HTTP requests you might get in the future and catch them and do something like replay a cache or do that for full support of offline mode. But yeah, it's definitely a good combination to consider to have to be able to do offline. Yeah, makes things easier for sure.
Okay. There is another question from Mugatu. How do we check if a specific API is available on SSR?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I would say try it, do the migration, test things, and see if it works. As we saw in one of my last slides, the only exception are really manipulating document or navigator or these native APIs. So if you're using a library that doesn't do that, it should work by default, right? There should not be any difficulties. If the library didn't do that work of using these hooks to manipulate the DOM and access those objects within those hooks, then it might, the API will not work by default, and the author would have to either fix that, or you would have to find another option, basically. But yeah, because it's so to make the switch, I think that really most APIs should be available on SSR. Within Angular, everything is, for sure. So that's not a problem. It's only if you use external libraries that maybe some of them didn't do the little bit of work to cover that transition. But yeah, from my perspective, it should be like 99% should work on SSR no matter what. Yeah.
Okay. There is another question from Arthur. When you generate SSR app, are the pages rendered during the build time or when once the user requests the page visiting the app's URL?
So both, right? We saw that when I run ng-build, it's going to create a static pre-rendered version of the page. And then in the browser, when we navigate, it's going to load that by default and then take over with Angular on the client side and possibly refresh that page if needed. So it's really a mix of both, and various pre-rendering at build time, and then taking over in the browser using the re-rendering in the server once we have loaded the application in the browser.
Mm-hmm. And one more question from Arthur. Will every replayed event trigger sync change detection, or those events are somehow coalesced?
So I guess that would be in the case where someone clicks 5 times on the same button. Do we trigger 5 click events or just one? That's a good question. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it. I would say it would trigger the 5 events consecutively. If you do like 5 clicks, it would just do the 5 clicks. And then the Angular application would react just the way it would, if the user does 5 clicks on that button on a regular client-side app. So I don't think there would be any difference from that perspective, but again, something to double check just in case. But I don't see why they would have made it any different.
Mm-hmm. And the last question from the Łukasz. How to handle first-time requests for a route that is not SSG generated? That is not SSG, not SSR?
Yeah, so what's going to happen in that scenario is that, the Angular router is going to handle that on the client side. So it's going to see, oh, I have to go to that component. It's going to change the URL, and then there's no server-side index HTML returned. So Angular is just going to load the component and work like the Angular we already know. So there's just no difference in that case. It just like regular client-side Angular if there's no SSR pre-rendering or SSG done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just falls back to what it already knows.
Okay. So Alain, that was the last question I bring on. There is like plenty of questions. So if you have a while, it will be great if you can jump to the chat and maybe answer some of them, because there is like SSR is the hot topic, a lot of questions, but also we have to go on. So that's it. So thank you again for being part of our meetups. It's like the second time, and I hope to see you again in the future. So
yeah, no problem. My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for your questions.
Okay, have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Bye. Okay, so before we move on to the next speaker, I have got an announcement to share. We are about to publish a new edition of our free ebook, The Ultimate Guide to Angular Evolution. This guide includes the roadmap of changes in Angular versions, highlighting the problem-solving benefits in some structured format. We are currently updating it to include all of the features from the latest version of Angular, which is Angular 20. We are also opening the registration for waiting lists. So if you want to be one of the first to learn about the Angular 20 throughout our ebook, please use the link in the comments to join the waitlist. And now I can move on to our second speaker. So let me introduce Damian Maduzia. This is his first performance on the Angular Love Meetup, so big applause for him. Damian is big fan of bowl of ramen, keen on website accessibility and design, passionate about creating inclusive digital experience. He is with us today with a talk, Case Study, Building an Accessible Product Variant Selector. Welcome on stage, Damian.
Hello, Matt. Thanks for the invitation.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm fine, good and excited, thanks.
Thanks. So are you a little bit stressed or not at all?
Should I be stressed?
No, you shouldn't, but sometimes people are getting stressed when they are attending first time. So that's why I'm asking. You should feel very comfortable around us. So
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so as I have asked Alain, also would like to ask you, what is your thoughts, your favorite thing in Angular 20?
Right, so as we've already discussed, it's mainly about stability, but I was very happy to find out about the changes to the template compiler as a person who is a fan of making HTML templates as concise as possible. So that's definitely a big plus for me.
Okay, yeah, as you said, as we said in the past, a lot of about the stabilization and developer experience improvement. So without taking more time, the stage is yours. We'll see you back in the Q&A session, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you. Let me set things up on my end. All right, I think we're good to go. Hi everyone, my name is Damian Maduzia, and today I'm going to walk you through some key accessibility concerns to have in mind when working on a common UI scenario, a variant selector. This talk follows a practical approach and hence case study in the title. But before we start, a quick intro. I work as a developer at House of Angular, and I got into the world of accessibility 3 years ago when I was working in a media industry on an application with strict accessibility requirements. This challenge pushed me to dive into this topic, and over time, as I was learning more about it, I found out that, first of all, writing accessible code doesn't have to be hard or time-consuming, and that it can even sometimes be fun, which is the mindset I would like to leave with you today. Besides that, I like to push limits with unconventional layout solutions, both at work and in my side projects, and when I'm not at my desk, you can most likely find me cycling or playing racket sports, ideally somewhere without internet. We are going to kick things off with scratching the surface of the accessibility topics, and this high-level overview is going to give us a sound introduction, which will let us transition to introducing the case study. Afterwards, we are going to start with the live coding session, when we will fix a common accessibility flow, also making the template more semantic. Finally, I'm going to leave you with some key takeaways to have in mind in your day-to-day work. So at this point, you might be wondering, what is the entire accessibility topic about? It is often abbreviated to A11Y, which comes from the 11 letters between A and Y. And it's basically about making your websites usable by as many people as possible. Let's have a look at the main categories and what they mean to us as developers. So first of all, we have the visual impairments, which are about the people who don't have a good vision or who even can't see at all. These can be addressed, first of all, with screen reader support, but also with using fonts that scale or ensuring high contrasts. Besides that, we have mobility impairments, which are about people who rely on keyboard interactions or voice assistant software. This can be accommodated with, first of all, using interactive elements for elements that are supposed to be interactive, and also for ensuring visible focus rings around them when focused. Besides that, we have cognitive impairments, and this we can consider, first of all, with using elements that are opinionated, such as links that are blue when not visited and purple when visited, and also reducing unnecessary animations and clutter. It's worth noting that accessibility isn't solely about the users, but that it also improves the developer experience. And one of the reasons for that is that it encourages writing clean semantic HTML, which is easier to reason about, but also more predictable, since rather than using custom behaviors, we rely on native browser behaviors. Let's have a look at this simple example of what would it take to make a regular div function like a button. So first of all, we would need to have the vol attribute on it to be interpreted as a button by assistive technologies. We would also need the tab index of 0 to make it tabbable. And finally, we would need to style it to, for instance, support the pointer cursor when we hover over it. We have all of these behaviors built into the standard button elements. And I know this specific scenario might sound trivial and unrealistic to you, because at the end of the day, why would you use a div for a clickable element with plain text? So with that said, let's turn this over to a more practical example. which is an accordion trigger. So over here, we have a section with 2 panels. And when you have a closer look at them, you're going to notice that the last of them is featuring an outline. Nothing fancy about it, actually, because it's just the standard browser behavior for focused elements. Let's have a look under the hood. So this is something that might be counterintuitive to you because we are actually wrapping the button element with an H3. So let me explain that at the first place. So when using the heading like this, we are actually making the button text included in the headings hierarchy. And headings hierarchy consists of all the heading levels all the way from H1, which is the most significant one, to H6, which is the least significant one. With this in place, we are having this text, as I said, included in the hierarchy, and you can consider it as an analogy to a table of contents in a book. And rather than only serving as a visual title in your markup, for the users relying on assistive technologies, it can be also used to navigate through the websites with some key bindings that you can compare to how you skim through the table of contents of a blog article. Then finally, we have a button. And as you can see in this snippet, rather than solely using the plain text, it can also make up quite complex markups. Now, it's worth noting that we have an image tag which serves only for decorative purposes, and this needs some particular treatment. So first of all, we are setting the alt attribute, which serves for alternative text in case there were problems with fetching it, to an empty string, which notifies the screen reader that this is only for decoration. Besides that, we have the area hidden set to true, which hides it from the screen reader. Besides that, there are also 2 area properties on the button, and their purpose is to identify either the state or the purpose of elements, once again to the assistive technologies. So first of all, we have area controls, which points to the ID of the element that gets expanded once we click the button using some custom JavaScript handling, and also area expanded, which communicates the current state of the panel, by default false. And besides making things work for the people that wouldn't be able to use them without accessibility concerns, accessibility also helps respect user preferences, because some of the users have their own way that is the best for them and that works best for them in terms of interacting with the web content. As example, we could, for instance, mention using dark mode, high contrast mode, scalable fonts, or reduced motion. Let's have a look at some example, which once again concerns the accordion. So we are going to have a look how it expands. And as you can notice, when we click on the trigger, we are going to have the body displayed with a smooth animation. And for most of us, this is actually the preferred behavior that looks much better than just a sudden shift to the full height. But like I said, there are some users who might not want this, and there is an easy way to honor this. So once again, let's have a look under the hood. And in this simple CSS snippet, we are starting with styling the accordion content class, which contains the body. First of all, we are starting with height of 0 and overflow hidden so that nothing is displayed when it is in the initial state. Then we can do something interesting because we can hook into the accordion trigger that we've discussed previously using the area expanded attribute. So as you can see, area attributes can not only be used for assistive technologies support, but we can also utilize them in CSS using the standard attribute selector. Then we are using the adjacent symbol combinator in order to target the content, which, like I said, contains the body. Then we are using the calc size CSS function to calculate the new size. And this is a fairly new CSS feature, which basically calculates the size to be the same as for the standard auto value based on the intrinsic size of the content, with a difference that it returns a numeric value, which in opposite to auto can be animated. And now, speaking of honoring preferences, there is a very simple way to achieve this with the prefers reduce motion media query, which takes one of the 2 values. It could be no preference or reduce. And I highly encourage you to use no preference one for the animations that you think shouldn't be visible for everyone. Coming next, we have the scalable fonts that I mentioned. So here we have some custom properties which are set to rem, which refers to the root element, and the root element can also be tweaked by the user easily. So down below the snippet, we have a screenshot from the Chrome developer tools with the font size settings. Once we set it to a larger value, the root element is going to change from the default 16 pixels that we typically consider to either a larger value and to a smaller value, adapting the interface to what the user expects it to be. Last but not least, we have the focus rings that I briefly mentioned. So as you can see over here on the navbar on the website, one of the elements is featuring a dark focus ring. And even though that's probably not the most aesthetic experience that you can imagine, it serves its purpose of displaying the currently focused elements, which is especially valuable for the users who rely on either keyboard navigation or voice navigation, or, like we are discussing in this chapter, who just prefer this than using mouse. So I highly discourage removing this animation at all, even if you don't like it. And rather than that, consider making it more suitable and also more consistent with the rest of your layout. In this case, with making it a little bit thicker, also setting a color on it and giving it a bit of an offset to make it have a little bit of space around the text. Finally, accessibility is required by law. And I know this might sound unrealistic and far-fetched to you, but what if I told you there was actually a common case of a blind user who sued a major restaurant chain in the US for an inaccessible ordering system? Basically, he couldn't make an order, and the court sided with him. There was a strong basis for this, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically the Title III of it, which has been interpreted by the US courts and the Department of Justice to apply to websites, specifically to the ones which are about public services, such as e-commerce, restaurant, educational institutions, and financial services. Europe is not standing still in this matter either, with its directive called European Accessibility Act, EEA, which obligates the companies to have accessible interfaces, with the fines ranging from 5,000 euros to 20,000 euros per violation, depending on the severity of the issue. And this is actually a very up-to-date topic for the residents of Poland, because the law introducing it is taking effect on June 28th. So now that we have a sound grasp of accessibility, let's turn this over to the case study. We are going to base it on a fairly simple e-commerce application, which is mostly about a variant selector for the product that we would like to order. Our intention is that the variants, rather than only being selectable with mouse click, which is the default behavior for many of us, can also be navigated with keyboard. Let me present what I mean in a brief video, and pay attention to the cursor, which will be sited next to the tiles in order to prove that it doesn't participate in tile selection. Let me also outline it in red. So as you can see, the variants are changed, as well as the main image to the left, but at the same time, we are not using mouse, which is crucial for, like I said, certain group of users. So this raises a fair question of how can we make the tiles navigable with arrow keys? And the answer is actually easier than you might think. It's not really about analog radios, but rather a specific part of it, which is the set of physical buttons with some station presets and with only one of them being pushed at the time. This part gave its name to a standard HTML radio input, which is going to be a perfect fit for our solution. And this might be counterintuitive to you once again, because when you think of a radio button, you imagine it as a circle, which gets either highlighted or filled in when it's selected. So in order to achieve our result, we are going to need a custom solution. With all that said, let's take it over to the live coding session. So we are going to start with a starting point, and let me start explaining the sections of the page. So first of all, we have a simple navbar. We also have the tiles selector, or the variant selector that we've already discussed, which is bound to the main image to the left. There are also some other navigable buttons at the bottom of the page. And now, as you can see, clicking works fine selecting the variants, but the moment I start navigating through the website with tab clicks, As you can see, the navbar works just fine, but once I reach its final element and press tab again, something unexpected is going to happen, because the variant selector actually got skipped, and we have the focus outline on the decrement button. This is obviously an accessible flaw, because a user who isn't relying on mouse cannot select a variant. Now, let's have a look at the tiles element, and we are quickly going to find out the reason why aren't they working. And the reason is that we are using the standard HTML image elements, which don't have any interactivity built in by default. So let's have a look at the variant selector component, which we are going to have highlighted right now, and see what we can do about this. First of all, let me start explaining the TypeScript file. It's fairly simple, consisting of two inputs, one of them being the variants, which are used for rendering the tiles, and the active variant, which is used for the blue glow around the element. Then we have the variant selected output, which is used for communicating the change to the parent component and changing the main image to the selected variant. Now over to the HTML element. First of all, we have the caption of selected color, which is bound to the currently selected variant. We also have the tiles container, which serves for styling purposes and contains a for loop iterating over the variants and displaying the image tags. At this point, it's worth noting that first of all, we have the active class, which sets the custom styling of the blue outline, and that we also have a click binding to the output that I showed previously. So with all that said, and with the radio element introduced, why not to go ahead and add it in our template? So let me type input of type radio. And now, in order for a group of radio buttons to be connected together and only for one of them to be pushed at the time, they need to have a common name. In this case, let it be variant. At this point, we will need two property bindings, first of which being the value, which is going to be the variant ID. And we might also want to bind to the standard checked attribute. And for that purpose, let's use the condition that we used to have for the active class. Nice. And last but not least, there is also a standard HTML event that we can use for communicating the change, which is called change. And when that happens, let's use the same event emitter as for the click handler. Let me rebuild the application and let's have a look what happened. So now all the tiles are accompanied with a radio button, and once I once again start navigating all the way from the navbar, we are going to notice something interesting, because the first of the radio button is going to be outlined in black. And now, as I start pressing the arrow keys, we are going to notice that navigation works just fine, and we are able to go for all the tiles and select the one that's interesting to us. Now, once I press the tab button, we are going to navigate to the following section, and we can also use the shift button combination to jump back to the previous one. Nice. So at this point, I mentioned we have a custom solution of a class which is conditionally triggered, and this could actually be replaced with a solution based on standard CSS pseudo classes. So let me remove the active class, and let me turn this over to the CSS file. Now we can grab the active class, we can move it outside of the image selector. And since I mentioned pseudo selectors, let's hook into the input of type radio once again, which is in the checked state. Now we can once again use the adjacent sibling selector that I briefly brought up with the accordion example, and we can use it to target the image. And now, once I rebuild, we are going to notice that we have the same effect that we used to have previously. Let me start tabbing. And this works fine with one exception, because we also have a custom click handler, which is a bit counterintuitive to me, because it's placed on an element which isn't supposed to be interactive at the first place. So we could remove this as well. And now we could also add yet another HTML element, which is the label tag around the input and an image. And the way it works in a scenario like this is that it connects the label with an input in such a way that clicking anything within the label, including the image, will focus it, also triggering the standard behavior. So let's have a look what happens. And now it's taking some time. Yeah, it got a little bit laggy. But now, once I click on the tiles, we are going to notice that we are having this behavior incorporated with the label tag, which is another sweet addition. So at this point, we have these radio elements, and we didn't intend to have them at the first place. We just wanted to have a behavior that mimics them. So now there is a bunch of ways to hide an element like this while maintaining its native behavior. And since we are here for Angular, why not to use an Angular-based solution? For that reason, let me go ahead and let me type npm install Angular CDK. And for this purpose, we are going to use a simple utility class that is exposed by the library, which is called CDK visually hidden. And now at this point, don't get me wrong, adding an entire package like this, which consists of a bunch of tools for building web interactions just for the sole purpose of using a single utility class, is probably not the best solution. But at the same time, it is so widespread that you probably already have it in your project. So it might be worth pointing that out. Now that I have the class in place, we are going to notice that our behavior is not working yet. And the reason for this is that we also need to import it in our CSS file. So let me go ahead and import it with the use keyboard. And also include a mixin, which emits the class that we are using, which is called CDK A11Y visually hidden. With that in place, let me go ahead and save the changes. And as you can see, the radio buttons are no longer present, but the site is getting a little bit laggy once again. But now that it starts working, you are going to notice that the arrow keys are working perfectly for changing through the tiles. And we are almost there. And the reason I've used the word almost is that once I tap through to the next section and then tap back to the variant selector, you are going to notice that there is no distinction between outlining the currently selected element with the focus somewhere else in the application, let it be the decrement button or the input for the amount of t-shirts, and also for navigating through the tiles. So one of the ways we could accommodate it is, once again, using a standard browser behavior, which is a pseudo selector. So at this point, let me duplicate the selector that we used to have. Let me replace the pseudo selector with focus. And now, since the browser uses black outlines in each case, let's also use the black color for it for consistency. And also to make it stand out a little from the blue indicator, let's make it a little bit thicker. So now let me save my changes. Let me start navigating. And once I reach our variant selector, we are going to notice that the color of the outline turned black and that it's also thicker, which looks correct to me and also looks consistent with the other interactive elements on the website. So this is already really good to me. And with that in place, we could also accommodate some of the assistive technologies so that our component is more inclusive and also more intuitive for all the users. And now that we have turned this content of the for loop into a set of labels along with inputs, this actually sounds like a perfect scenario to be grouped within a field set attribute. It is typically used within the forms, but in a real-life scenario, you will most likely have a component like this contained in the form. So let me go ahead and let me use the field set tag. Now, a field set tag typically consists of the legend tag, which displays the caption for the group. And I cannot think of a better candidate for it than the existing div with the selected color text. So let's go ahead and let's turn this to the legend tag. And now, for all the sighted users, selecting the variant is pretty intuitive and obvious because we can see the colors of the t-shirts on the tiles. But we have to have in mind that this is not the case for all the users. And in order to accommodate them, the ones using the screen reader, for instance, we can use yet another ARIA property, which in this case would be ARIA label, which would, in this particular scenario, mean read this aloud for the screen reader when the element is focused. So now, in order to use it with property binding in Angular, we obviously have to wrap it in square brackets, but at the same time also prepend it with attr. And let's use the variant name for it. Now, last but not least, a field set by default has an area role of group, which is pretty close to what we want. But since this is a group of radio buttons, why not to use a radio group in this particular scenario? Nice. So this is looking pretty good to me already. The tiles are interactive both with mouse clicks for the users who interact with web content like this, but it also supports keyboard navigation, as well as tabbing from the section and tabbing to the section. Perfect. And I think we are in a good moment to return to our presentation and summarize what we've just done. So first of all, we have replaced a solution which had an accessibility flow because it consisted of image tags, and we have replaced it with radio buttons that use the images as a label. Then we have also removed a custom class that was used for styling and turned conditionally, and we have used pseudo selectors instead. Finally, we have replaced some of the divs which don't have any semantic meanings to some elements that could be helpful for users relying on assistive technologies. So what I would like you to remember after this talk is that, first of all, accessibility isn't actually only about supporting assistive technologies and users who rely on them, but it actually improves the experience for everyone, be it someone who prefers the dark mode or using the keyboard for navigating through the website. Also, it significantly improves the developer experience, as I've just tried to prove to you. Besides that, overlooking accessibility can hurt your business, from legal risk to lost users and also reputation decline. As I've also tried to show you, coding with accessibility in mind doesn't really have to be hard or time-consuming. Before we end, I also highly encourage you to set up a screen reader and start playing around with it, since all the area roles and properties that I was presenting, as well as importance of semantic HTML, might sound a bit abstract to you, and using a screen reader gives you a new, fresh perspective, also making you a better developer overall. The good news is that you most likely have a software like this incorporated in your operating system, with Narrator for Windows, Orca for GNOME-based Linux distributions, and VoiceOver for iOS. With all that said, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'm also leaving a link to the repository where you can also follow the steps from the live coding, as well as get familiar with some learning resources that I recommend for getting started with accessibility. So thank you all, and let me turn this over back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Damian. That was really great talk, especially right now, due to some law changes in the European Union, where more and more sites will need to be really accessible. We have already some questions, so I will go directly to them. Piotr asked the questions, but I see that it's like spread across a few messages. So is there a preferred way to navigate via the keyboard? And also then, after all, he adds like a select or radio group as you demonstrate that arrows are preferred. So I guess like which way of navigation is preferred when we have tabs and arrows. That's how I understand this whole message.
Sure. So first of all, we actually have some built-in behaviors which we don't need to handle manually. And as you could see in the case of radio buttons, I didn't have to write any custom event handlers. We just have them worked with arrows by design. On the other hand, for the buttons and for the inputs, it is an opinionated pattern to use tabs for switching between them. And if you are asking for some patterns, I highly encourage the w3.org website, which is linked in the learning resources in the README of my project, which features some section with all these patterns to be followed described.
Thanks. There is another question from Michał. How do you handle differences between different screen readers?
I'm not sure if I understand that question correctly, because different screen readers, for instance, might have, on one hand, different key bindings, but they might also interpret ARIA attributes in a different meaning. So I don't really have a good answer for that. What I can say is that I've been working with two of them. So I've used NVDA when I was using Linux, and I used Orca. And typically when you follow the opinionated patterns, they should work just fine following the behavior that you intended to have.
Yeah, so just to help me also understand, so as you said, if we have like opinionated way how to write the code to be accessible in the proper way by these devices, so probably how this device reads is on the side of this probably device, right? To correctly understand some well-defined set of rules.
Yes, so it is built in the screen reader to support the behaviors that we write in the HTML in some opinionated way.
Okay. And there is one more question from Anna. Why we should choose SDK styles to hide the radio button over just visibility hidden?
And that's a good question, because if you use visibility hidden, then the event would be taken out from the accessibility tree and it wouldn't be focusable anyway. So for instance, if you were working on this on your own, rather than using visibility hidden, you could, for instance, use opacity 0, which would then support focus.
Let's see a few seconds whether there will be more questions. Okay, so probably there will not be more questions. So Damian, thank you very much again. It was really great and important presentations. And I hope to see you in some future meetups, maybe some upcoming one after the summer.
Thank you, Matt. I'll be looking forward, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so we are about to reaching our final talk, which will be shown by the Dmytro Mezenski. So Dmytro is a Google developer expert and founder of Decoded Frontend YouTube channel, where he shares his knowledge to help developers worldwide improve their skills with Angular. He has a lot of experience sharing knowledge, so check his website for more information about new Angular stuff. Welcome on stage, Dmytro.
Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Glad to be here once again.
Yeah, you're again with us, so very happy to see you. And again, probably I am the MC of this event, so we are meeting again.
Thank you for inviting. Always a pleasure.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you. Just recently released a new course about NX workspaces, and yeah, try after the release always some little different things to fix, to improve, and I'm currently working on it every day.
So it's about the NX, right?
Yeah, it's NX.
Okay, and so if we are just talking, you can maybe give us some insight what exactly you're trying to cover by this course and so on.
Well, there I focus mostly on NX, and I approach teaching NX without using magics like code generators, NX generators from the beginning, and I'm trying to slice by slice explain NX configurations, doing everything manually, so you better understand what is hidden behind these generated configurations. Because if you try to follow official documentation and stuff, you very quickly get huge bunch of configurations, and it's sometimes hard to understand, especially learn NX this way.
Yeah.
So it's very useful during the development, but for learning purposes, it's not. So it's for beginners, and there I try to demystify, so to say, NX and show how you can adapt it into your projects easily.
I think that this approach is pretty important, because whenever you generate something with an exit, you will just get plenty of files, and then you don't know what each of them is responsible for, right?
Sure, exactly, yeah.
Okay, so without taking more time, the stage is yours, and good luck. We'll see you on the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you. Good. So I hope you see my slides. If not, just drop message in the chat. But I hope everything is ready to get started. And in the next half an hour, we're going to talk about Render 2 and the role of this very interesting piece of Angular architecture, and we will dive a little bit into the underhood of the Angular to see how things are working. And yeah, Mateusz already did some part of my work. He introduced me. Yeah, my name is Dmitry Mrzensky. I'm author of Decoded Frontend YouTube channel. You can scan this QR code and you will be navigated to my YouTube, where you can explore different videos, check them out, maybe subscribe and check my video courses as well. Anyway, why I have chosen this topic? Well, everything started from one of my recent videos. It was like top 7 myths about Angular, where I covered some things that were right at some point in time about Angular, but nowadays it's not relevant anymore. And there was a part about Render 2. And there I said that, okay, we no longer need Render 2 in our application code. And after some time, I was reached by one of my followers who asked a reasonable question like, okay, if we don't need it anymore, why it wasn't just deprecated? And I was like, okay, that's actually a great question, and I don't have right and accurate answer for that. And I started to investigate and diving into this topic, and today I'm going to share with you my findings, what I found, and I hope it will be interesting and useful for you. So what we are going to cover is that, the role of Render 2 in Angular, as I already said. We will see when it makes no sense to use Render. And you will see some use cases, very, very rare use cases, when you still need it. So let's get started. And let's get started with understanding what is Render 2. And here I personally separate the concept of a render and the Render 2 as a token, injection token, or like certain part of the Angular API. So as a concept, Render is responsible for creation and manipulation of the DOM elements in component templates, and it also applies eventually styles to our components. And Render 2, it's an abstract class that defines API for already some concrete renderer, and it is used as an injection, not properly say, not injection token, but the token that you use in order to inject the component renderer. And here on the right side, you can see some part of API that this Render 2 class defines. So you can create element, you can append childs, create text, whatever. And how does it work? If you are curious enough, then you probably try to see how your component look after the compilation. If not, there is a chance to check this out. So as you can see, after the compilation, our template isn't represented as a string like we have in the source code, but instead it is represented by a function that runs also inside a bunch of other smaller functions. In context of Angular and Ivy renderer in particular, they are called instructions. Those are very little functions that perform certain little tasks regarding the DOM manipulation. Like element start, it creates an HTML element, instruction text, create a text with a string, hi, etc. And usually this is where like research stops. Like, this is already quite crazy to go into this part. But if you go further and have a look what is going on inside these instructions, for example, element start, you will see there some interesting lines of codes. For example, you will see that from the L view, which is a logical view, this is the internal data structure that Angular uses to store instances for different stuff that component needs, for example, renderer. And from there, from this L view, we get an instance of the renderer associated with the particular component. You can think of it as a injection, something like dependency injection. I don't want to dive into the differences, but as a mental model, that should be okay to think about it like that. And if you go further, there is a huge call stack of calling different other functions, and one of the functions is create element node. That obviously creates a node, and you can see that a renderer is being used there by this function, and there we call the create element method from the particular renderer, and eventually it creates HTML element that is rendered and what we see eventually on the screen. But why do we need like this renderer, this abstraction layer? Why cannot we just interact with everything directly through the DOM API? This is because we actually need multiple different renderers that we can switch at runtime, and those renderers, they should perform different ways of rendering our templates. Again, the question, but why? Why it is needed? Well, this is because components, they can be created in various modes and environments. What I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at this simple component. As you know, in our Angular components, we can enable or disable encapsulation, view encapsulation, using the encapsulation property and set it to none, emulate, and so on. We'll see them in a minute. And in the constructor, I just inject the render that associated with this component. And behind this renderer token, there will be resolved a particular renderer that does actual work. And there I just destructure the name of the constructor so that the console log we will see the class name that stays behind this renderer token. And if we use view encapsulation on, so we don't encapsulate view and styles for our component, in the browser console, you will see that there was used non-encapsulation DOM renderer class. So this is concrete implementation of renderer that knows how to render stuff for this particular mode. And if you have a look at the source code of it, you will see that there is no actually magic. I removed a small part of other additional checks that are happening in real source code, but I just wanted to simplify things. But eventually what is happening there, it's just interaction with the document, with a normal document that is part of the global window, and create elements. So actually we interact with the native JavaScript DOM API, no magic at all. And eventually this renderer will render our component in such a way so that we have application demo component and paragraph with a string high. If you do a similar thing, but for emulated view encapsulation, which is actually default way, right? You will see that the output will be another type of render. It will be emulated encapsulation DOM render 2, such a long name. And you can see that it does slightly different piece of work. First, it creates element like the previous do. And by the way, this renderer extends like if you have a look at the source code, this renderer extends the previous one. And it calls the super call, so it performs just creation of the DOM element as previous one. But additionally, what it additionally does is it sets the special attribute which applies certain like hash attribute to the component that emulates actually the encapsulation. You know how it looks like. You all saw it many times in your Angular applications. This is this ng host, ng hash, and ng content ng special hash. This is how Angular emulates encapsulation of your styles, so that styles you define in the styles property, they like applicable, they are not global, they visible only in scope of this component view. That's the idea. And of course, the similar story for the if you enable the shadow DOM. Shadow DOM also has a dedicated renderer. It calls shadow DOM renderer, and it creates element the same way as the first renderer we saw, but additionally, the shadow DOM renderer inside the constructor, it does some additional work, like attaches shadow DOM to the component, right? And eventually you will see that rendered component, but with the shadow root attached. So this is the idea. And also, if you try to, what is also interesting, if you provide animations to your application and try to console log render for any of component with any view encapsulation strategy, so you will see that there will be resolved base animation renderer. And what is interesting is that base animation renderer, it actually kind of delegates work eventually to the non-encapsulation renderer or shadow DOM renderer, depending on what encapsulation strategy your component has. But it knows how to perform some little tweaks with animations. But this is not all as well. If you try to apply animations array to your component, then your component will be rendered by the animation renderer that can handle a bit more specific use cases related to animations. And we will see some of them later in the end of my talk. But what I wanted to say by showing you all these things is that the concept of the renderer is widely used under the hood. You can see it's like everywhere when it comes to rendering stuff. And here's the question, like, but do we need it in our application code? And well, mostly no. Mostly we don't need it, despite it is widely used under the hood. This is because, like, if you have a look at the implementation of any of these renderer classes I mentioned, you will see that a lot of them they just delegate work to the native DOM API. So add class does nothing special. It just uses the class list and adds the class name you want to add to this element. So this is the same result as if you use the native element, then if you use the element ref, then you access native element and use the same API. There's no difference. And a lot of the API in renderers, they like do the same thing. It's just unnecessary wrapper. And even more, because this wrapper defines, as you can see, element is any, and it is any in everywhere, in every render, at least from what I saw. In this case, it kills the typings immediately. And if you try to set property, for example, some input element, and you made a typo, you said not a placeholder but something else, you will not see any build error or anything like that. But if you do this through the native native API, you have strict typings there. But again, here's like a small note. This is not what you have to do in your application. You should never, like, not never, but try to avoid manipulation, direct manipulation of DOM elements in Angular. Rely on what Angular provides you. This is just for like demo learning purposes. This is not advise you to do that. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to show that sometimes, yeah, it might happen, and typings issue might be occur, and for with renderer you might have such a problems. Yeah, we'll be talking today a lot about the things that you actually don't need to do in your production apps, but that's good for understanding how the framework is actually working. Anyway, so use cases when the renderer 2 is still needed. We still have few of them. Again, warning that things you will see later, it's just use cases that happen so rare, and personally I have never had such a use cases in my practice, but maybe for some of you it might be useful. And yeah, just keep in mind that try to solve issues first with the normal Angular approaches by creating embedded views, stuff like that. And that render 2 and manipulation with DOM should be your like last resort, so to say. And the first use case, it's when you have to create DOM nodes respecting their encapsulation. So you, for example, can use render and create some div element. And if you do it through render, then your div will be created with attribute hash that matches the one of the component where it is created. So as you can see in my concrete scenario right here, I create an element within the demo component, but I append this child to the body. So this element appears completely in different place, not inside the component view, but somewhere else. But they have the same encapsulation hash, which means that styles for the div will be applicable to this newly created div, even though it is not part of this HTML3. All right. So again, I see it maybe somehow like if you want to create overlay, this is some potential use case, and you want to keep like styles encapsulated, and you don't want to leak them global only to apply them to the newly created div that is not part of your view. Maybe in this use case it would be useful, but yeah. Anyway, this is what you can do. This is the first use case. And the second one is animation toggling. So you know that in animations, we can animate different elements by using this add property and define different animation state. And when the state changes, the Angular performs this transition, right? And if you try to change it somehow, you know, using their native API, in native DOM API, it will not work because such a property doesn't exist for the native element. And even if you like suppress the type checking and will make it like make it so that the code will be compiled, it will not work anyway, because this is Angular specific thing, and it has to be handled through the renderer too, because yeah, so you have to use the set property, provide the animation property, and then change the state of your animation. And how it works, this is because set property, it overrides, namely set property of the animation renderer, it overrides slightly the logic, and before the property is applied, it performs a check that if the name of the property starts with @ sign, namely animation prefix, it understands that, okay, we are talking about animation. So the second step, it checks if animation is disabled or not. And if it is not disabled, then it delegates animation processing to the animation engine. Yeah, and animation will be triggered and used. Otherwise, if it's not animation, then there will be a set property, just again using the JavaScript DOM native API. Another use case, and it is also related to animations, this is the handling animation events. If you didn't know, Angular animations expose two additional events that you can listen to and perform some actions when they happen. This is the animation start and animation done. I think this is pretty easy to understand the intention just from the name. And what is interesting also is that if you try to use or listen for these events using the add event listener, it will not work as well. And this is, again, the use case when you have to use a renderer and use the corresponding listen method that can handle this type of events, and you can subscribe to these animation events and perform the job you need. Right, and yeah, this is pretty much everything I would like to share with you. Those are my findings about renderer. I hope it was interesting, and if you know real-life use cases about any of these three cases I showed you, please let me know in the comments or reach me somehow. I'm really interested because I have never had the need for that. And yeah, this is pretty much it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dmitro. Really nice presentation about the renderer, which sometimes might be tricky for the people, like when to use, when we shouldn't use, and so on. And we have already the question here regarding this kind of the thing. So,
okay,
is using renderer tool comes with performance side effects?
I don't think that you have any performance issues with the. I mean, if we compare to like manipulating DOM API like natively or via renderer, I don't think that we have any like performance differences because as I showed, render to very often just like wrapper additional method around the native DOM API. So I think it should be pretty much the same.
Yeah, we are safe, right? Just using the renderer tool.
Yeah, but you're safe. But my point is that in most cases, you don't have to use it because there is no need. Only for those 3 unique cases, which happen so rarely.
Okay. Let's see whether there will be more questions. There was also some digression from Carol that, as I remember, Angular team wanted to deprecate renderer too. I don't know whether it's somehow still valid.
Fairly speaking, I didn't hear that. Maybe it was like about deprecating it for like usage in your application code. But from what I see, render is very like heavily used in the rendering system of the Angular, and I don't know, maybe they have plans to switch to something different that will not involve render, and after that there will be deprecation and eventually removing that. That's those things I don't know.
Okay. There is one more question. Where should I prefer renderer factory 2 over just renderer 2? Any best practices?
Well, they serve a bit different issues. Like render factory 2 allows you to like render 2. This is already the token you can use to inject renderer into your like component and then call some methods. And the role of the render factory is to resolve which exactly renderer will be used associated with this render tool token. And so render factory 2 you would need to use if you want to implement your own renderer. And for example, you want to render component, I don't know, maybe not the best example, but in Canvas. And there it's slightly different. It's not the HTML, right? And you would need to implement something like Canvas renderer, and you want to render component with this renderer. So you will use the render factory in order to provide this your custom renderer.
Okay.
And after that, you already like work with it.
Yeah, so correct me if I am wrong. It means like renderer 2 you use to just get the instance of the currently existing renderer, and renderer factory 2 is just to create how this instance should looks like, right? And then
something like that. You can, I think you can think of it like you use factory resolution modifier when you perform some logic, and depending on this logic, you say that okay, this renderer will be used or that renderer will be used. And render factory 2, this is the way how you provide the renderer you want. In short, this is the way just provide your own renderer, your custom renderer.
Okay, and the last question, is there any relation between Zone.js and renderer 2, meaning that it will not be working if it removes from framework entirely?
I think they serve like they are very different. Yeah, so rendering and Zone.js, they serve different purposes. Zone.js, it's about notifying Angular that some async event happens in our application, and we should trigger change detection. And rendering, it's this is the like already we can say that part of change detection or part of the initial component rendering. They don't like if we remove Zone.js, the change detection will be triggered by some other mechanism like we have currently, right? Zoneless.
Mm-hmm.
And then the renderer and its method will be involved just by this new mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So they do not like the removing of the Zone.js will not impact. I think so. Will not impact.
So it's like Zone.js is responsible for triggering something what's operate on the renderer after some time. It's not directly connected, right?
So they kind of they work together like many other things in Angular, but they serve like totally different purposes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's it. So Dmitro, thank you one more time for being with us, for finding time for us. It was really a pleasure to have you with us, and have a nice day, and hopefully we'll have the chance to cooperate together again in some future events.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks all your team for organizing this awesome event. Great job. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Thanks. So have a nice
and everyone
evening.
Else, you too, and everyone who watched our stream. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, so that was our last talk. That's all we had for you today. I would like to remind you to mark our survey. This is your chance to win a ticket to NGD conferences, where you can find really a lot talented Angular developers, top Angular developers attend the conference, feel this atmosphere, talk about the Angular, and I'm sure learn a lot. At this point, I would like to also remind you that we as Angular Love, we are always open for your contribution. If you would like to start contributing to our blog, find the link also on the chat, fill the form, and become part of Angular Love contributors community. You are already our community, but you can contribute even more. Start writing your blogs, attend our meetups, and so on. So thank you for being part of our community. Thank you for being with us in this final meetup on Angular Spring Camp. Thank you if you have been with us across of these past events. And we really hope to see you at our upcoming events, which will be probably start doing after the summer break. Don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated about our events, new blogs, and some Angular news. And until then, stay curious, keep coding, and see you soon, guys. Bye. So have a nice evening.